Hi, I'm Jordan Wolf, and my topic of presentation is female perpetrators of sexual harassment. So, there are quite a few limitations of research regarding this topic. It would suggest that women aren't typically perpetrators of sexual harassment, and that may be true, but I personally think it's a lot more prevalent than we as a society expect, and there just isn't a lot of research on it because typically women aren't of power in the workplace and they don't hold positions that would make sexual harassment something that we would think about or something that we would really research. Because it's something I just thought about, and it's really interesting that there really isn't a lot of research because up until I had a personal experience with female sexual harassment, I never thought anything of it. I never thought it was something that I would have to be worried about or anything that I really took seriously because I never felt threatened by other women until I did, basically. I think we should study this topic because of the changing power dynamics of women in the workplace. The majority of sexual assault and harassment is perpetrated by men, but regarding women, how do they fly under the radar when they affect their victims as much, if not more, because they are continually excused from their behavior? With the growth of equality and women becoming more in power, they are abusing said power to exercise control over others. Harassment. It is the unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature, offensive remarks about a person's sex or gender, what they're wearing. If somebody compliments somebody's outfit, that's innocent, it's usually consensual, that's fine. But if somebody talks about somebody's body or compliments them and it's non-consensual, if they're asked to stop and continue to do so or escalate in another nature, that is sexual harassment. In the United States, it is illegal to sexually harass people, but it is not federally mandated that employees get sexual harassment training. It is a state-by-state basis. In Washington state, it is required for all employers to give their employees sexual harassment training. Whether that happens is questionable, and whether it's actually quality training, also questionable. We don't know. There's not something across the board that employers have to adhere to, so it's really up to them. Researching training videos, I found two legitimate ones, which is the first one that's listed here. And every example within this little cartoon is male perpetrators with female victims. So it's not really accurate to everything that could happen in the workplace. And it certainly doesn't show equality that women can also be perpetrators of sexual harassment. So it kind of creates a stigma that women are incapable of harassing others. The second video I listed, which I will link in my video, I just can't play them within the PowerPoint because I'm not that good at editing. So this SNL sketch is Fred Armisen. He's not very attractive. His female coworkers think he's creepy. So they call HR every time he comes around them. And then the other subject of the video is Tom Brady. He's a conventionally attractive young man. He's very fit. Every time he comes around the female coworkers, they swoon, they give him their phone number, ask him to lunch, even when he's not wearing pants in the workplace. So this video really is just parodying sexual harassment in the workplace and kind of downplaying it in a way that makes it okay. The moral of the story is if you are attractive, then you can sexually harass people because it's not technically sexual harassment, even though it 100% is. What do we know about this topic? We know that most of the incidences of female perpetrators is all anecdotal evidence, and they're all seemingly isolated incidences. There aren't a lot of high-profile legal cases regarding sexual harassment. We know with the Me Too movement that there are a lot of men in Hollywood or a lot of rich, high-profile men who are being accused of sexual harassment, but we're not seeing a lot of women in the same vein. So legal cases that we know, the most infamous one I would say is Mary Kay Letourneau. It happened right here in Washington State. She was a teacher. She actually raped a male student of hers when he was 12 years old. She got pregnant with his child. She went to jail. She got out, got pregnant with him again, served her time. They got married, and she was, an innocent woman, seemingly. She was married and she had 4 children of her own before she even met this student. It's really high profile because she's the kind of seen as the first woman to be a perpetrator of sexual assault in general, let alone any kind of sexual harassment, which is not typical. Sexual harassment is a lot more, I think, low key than, overt rape of a child. But it's really kind of what we focus on when we talk about women as perpetrators. And the second name I have on there, Avital Ronell, she is a 66-year-old German professor, and she identifies as a gay woman, but she sexually harassed one of her students who was an adult male who also he identifies as a gay male. And she sexually harassed him for a long time. She put him in compromising positions with blackmail, and it just really goes to show that sexual harassment is in no way about sex or attraction. It's about power and exercising that power over other people, whether they be male or female. Statistics on harassment. There's not a lot of quantitative research done on this topic, as I mentioned. In one survey a few years ago, 19% of men who answered had experienced some form of unwanted sexual attention, and of that, 65 of those men said they were harassed by women, and 1% of the women surveyed said they were harassed by another woman. The Defense Department also tracks harassment complaints, so this has to do with the US military, the Coast Guard. In 2016, there were 601 complaints, and 95% of the harassers who had complaints against them were male, and only 5% were female. So this shows that there's a very disproportionate amount of male to female perpetrators, which may be true, but there also isn't enough research to really back that up in the case of maybe people aren't reporting women because of stigma, because they feel, they would not be taken seriously or it's not worth their time. In the box to the right, out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 975 perpetrators will walk free. I think this may be even more so when they are female perpetrators. It's not worth it to victims to go through all that work, usually, of going to trial and going through the emotional trauma again and again just for their perpetrator to walk free. So that might be another reason why a lot of assaults or harassment is not typically shared with others anyway. Women aren't typically seen as aggressors, and women typically in the workplace have a reputation of, being a lot more passive. They're not going after other positions like men are, especially when there's different dynamics within the workplace. There's a lot of stigma of female perpetrators and their victims. When we look at the movie Horrible Bosses, Charlie Day's character is a dental assistant, and his boss is Jennifer Aniston. She is a dentist, and she sexually harasses him on a daily basis, and she even stages photos that she essentially rapes him, and she is labeled as a man-eater, as you can see in the movie poster. She is not seen as an aggressor, and the character played by Jason Sudeikis is completely into the idea of her being a sexual predator, and he even tries to sleep with her, and he thinks his friend is actually really lucky to be in that position, even though Charlie Day's character, it's not wanted by him in any way. But we see the movie and we think it's funny, or we think that she's a really attractive woman, so we think it's okay. for her to kind of play that power dynamic, because we think as a man he would be able to, fight her off if he wasn't actually into it. And that's what society kind of deems as acceptable, because men are usually able to overpower women. So sexual harassment doesn't really have anything to do with physicality. It has to do with power, and she is his boss, and she uses that power over him because she can get away with it. So women are usually safe. Even when they are an aggressor, they're still not seen as any sort of threat. Women are described as bullies. They're described as catty or toxic. When we use different labels to describe women and perpetrators of harassment, it really hurts the cause of getting victims justice, because when we make a gray area with something such as sexual harassment, it allows perpetrators to get away with what they're doing, because it just waters down what's really going on, which, cut and dry is sexual harassment most of the time. Woman to woman is maybe the most prevalent, because women can get nasty and they talk about each other's bodies, or they talk about each other's values, or, just them as a person. And using these alternative terms should really stop in the workplace, and we should be giving people the language to call out behaviors, no matter, what the consequences may be socially. It's important to out people who sexually harass others. And this can happen with equal or lesser status coworkers across the board. If a woman is somebody's boss, it's a little bit more overt and a little easier to see what is happening with power dynamics, because it's more apparent. But coworker to coworker absolutely can sexual harass one another, because they want to get that power over the other people and maybe get a leg up for a promotion, or they want to be equal, or they just want to show that they are having control over another person and that they really can get away with it if they do. So age and sexuality is a consideration. This video will not play, but again, I will link it. It's age restricted. It's about a 30-minute video about TV and film that shows female perpetrators of sexual harassment. And most of the clips featured are from TV shows and movies that are comedies. And each of these instances are seen as funny by the audience, because it's just showing power dynamics, that, a woman is overpowering a man, and it's not some kind of violent scene. And when the men are even explicitly stating that they have been raped, they are just laughed at, or they're not taken seriously, because male victims typically aren't taken very seriously. When people are perpetrators of sexual harassment, a lot of times they're given excuses, especially depending on their age. We attribute, they're a product of their time. When it's an older man or an older woman, we just say that they don't know any better, even though they do. They've, been around long enough to know that sexual harassment is wrong, and that they shouldn't be commenting about people's bodies or touching people in sexually explicit ways. It plays to, that whole values thing, that, what we think is right and wrong may be different than what other people think is right and wrong. But either way, cut and dry, when it comes to bodily autonomy, when somebody takes that away from us, it's harassment and it needs to stop. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when we talk about different sexualities as well, whether it's a straight woman hitting on a gay man, or a gay woman, harassing a straight man, or straight woman, whatever kind of combination you can think of regarding harassment. It's not about sex. I can't stress that enough. It's never about sex. It's never about attraction. It's about power. And we keep coming back to that, how it's a double-edged sword when, whether or not we want to report it, because will it be taken seriously? Preventative measures for workplace sexual harassment. Providing effective training. As I mentioned before, we don't know what kind of training people are giving to their employees. It could be something as simple as just signing a piece of paper saying they got training, whether they did or not. Workplace culture makes a huge difference when it's shown that sexually explicit conversations are acceptable, or making any kind of sexual advances or comments about other people's gender or sexuality is okay, then that becomes the climate of the workplace. And when somebody doesn't like it and they're outnumbered, they feel like they can't speak up. Or as a whole, if people don't like it, they feel they can't if their boss is the one perpetrating that kind of culture. So it kind of gets people stuck in a mindset of, what can I do? And I also learned through this article that I read that a lot of companies simply get insurance to protect themselves against sexual harassment lawsuits. They just see it as a cost of doing business. So instead of providing sexual harassment training, since it's not required by every state, it's more expensive to provide that training than it is just to pay for insurance to protect against sexual harassment against the company. So for my last slide, I just wanted to provide some resources for victims of assault or abuse. This is kind of a heavy subject, and it's important to know that there are resources out there if anybody watching this needs it or knows somebody who may need it. We have RAIN, which is the biggest network resource for people of sexual assault and abuse. That's their website. They have a ton of resources, information there. They have a 1-800 number. Washington State CPS 1-866 end harm. That's for children who are at risk of sexual assault, abuse, or even any kind of abuse. It doesn't matter if it's sexual or otherwise. And then also vulnerable adults. It doesn't have to just be, children. This is people in nursing homes. This is people who aren't really capable of taking care of themselves. So those are just some resources for everybody to just think about if it ever were to come to needing to provide that. And these are my references. They were mentioned throughout, but they're worth kind of looking into if you find this interesting as I do. I think it's really worth putting more research into in the field of sociology. I think it can really make a difference for victims and allowing them to kind of come forward, even if it is a woman, even if it's embarrassing, because it's something that we can really combat with numbers. It's something that we can show that is not acceptable in our society anymore, even though historically we just kind of turn the other cheek. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I really enjoyed learning about it for everybody, so enjoy.